When his forbidden touch became my lifeline, I fell into irresistible deep love forever. I still remember the exact temperature of that evening, the way the air pressed soft and humid against my skin like an unopened letter. The city kept breathing around me, buses sighing, neon pulsing, a far-off train rattling the bones of the night. I had promised myself I would not cross lines anymore, not the line between caution and trust, not the line between hunger and wisdom, not the line that turns a glance into a confession. Then his fingertips brushed my wrist. It was nothing and it was everything. A spark slid up my arm as if a wire had been hidden under the skin all along, waiting for a switch no one knew how to flip. That almost innocent contact was not staged to be dramatic. It was an accident, like sunlight catching a shard of glass and throwing a miracle across a wall. I looked up. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. The air changed shape around us, and I knew I was in trouble. I told myself the word forbidden like a prayer I was trying to learn by heart. It wasn't the world's loud rules I was afraid of. It was the quiet ones, promises made to myself in empty rooms after older wounds, vows to keep my heart small enough to manage. Yet the pull toward him felt larger than language. Each time we spoke, my voice steadied in a way I barely recognized, as if the syllables found real ground. Each time we parted, my chest burned in protest, a soft ache with its own clock. I attempted distance. I rehearsed sentences about timing, about caution, about not confusing intensity with destiny. But the body knows before the mind agrees. The body hears the truth when the mind is still inventing polite versions. I felt it in the simple things, how water tasted different after he laughed, how the city's noise quieted when he listened, how my own name sounded gentler in my mouth after he said it. Loneliness had been my shadow for longer than I admitted. It stood beside me in grocery store lines, sat across from me at cafe tables, crawled into bed with me when night corners went dark. It didn't beg or wail. It simply occupied space, familiar as an old sweater I could shrug into without thinking. He didn't come roaring against that emptiness. He leaned. He leaned with patience, with attention, with a steadiness that didn't make promises it couldn't keep. Sometimes he asked questions no one had asked me in years, small ones that opened large doors. What did you want before you learned to be careful? When did you last sleep peacefully? What would you keep if nobody was watching? Answering softened something tight behind my ribs. The ache that had felt permanent began to lift at the edges, as if a seam had loosened and light could breathe through. Healing, I realized, is rarely noisy. It is the quiet reintroduction of safety. The body relearning it can set down the shield and still survive. There was intimacy, but not the kind that rips pages from a book and calls the remaining fragments a story. This was tenderness that asked permission in 100 unspectacular ways. The first shared silence was not empty. It was a room we entered together and sat inside without performance. His hands were careful, speaking a grammar of respect I understood without translation. When he traced the line of my knuckles, there was no urgency to claim, only a promise to witness. His eyes met mine and didn't flinch from the parts of me I usually dimmed. I felt seen without being turned into proof. Desire lived there, yes, hot, insistent living, but it didn't swagger, it exhaled. It learned my pace, my seasons, my edges. The nearness we chose felt like a lit window in winter, warm, steady, softly bright, inviting me to stand close enough to thaw and strong enough to step back when breath needed room. The fear never entirely left. I won't rewrite history to make myself braver than I was. At night, I'd lie awake composing good, by speeches I never delivered, counting outcomes like they were beads on a tense rosary. I feared what breaking rules would cost me. I fear the judgment of those who prefer a tidy narrative, the ones who love love but only if it follows a familiar map. Most of all, I feared losing myself, handing over the keys to rooms I had rebuilt with my own shaky hands. Courage, I learned, has a texture. It is not a shout. It is a continuous trembling yes. So I made choices. Small ones at first, answering the message I wanted to ignore, letting my hand stay inside his for 5 seconds longer than safety demanded, allowing my laughter to be loud enough for strangers to hear. Consequences arrived as they always do, some expected, others not. Yet when the dust settled, what remained was my own face in the mirror, more honest than before, and a love that did not require me to disappear to earn its place. Desire, left undirected, burns like a field that forgets it can also feed. Devotion, I discovered, is desire's grown-up name. It is the daily decision to direct flame toward warmth rather than destruction. With him, I began practicing that choice. I brought my wants into daylight. I didn't disguise them as jokes or tuck them behind noble distractions. I said what I craved, the long walks with no destination, the coffee that takes an hour because our sentences keep finding new doors, the touch that doesn't rush past hello, the promise that we would keep coming back to the table even when the meal is simple. We set rituals like gentle anchors, notes tucked into ordinary places, a question we asked each other at dusk, a place on the pier where we stood and let the wind deliver our confessions to the river. These weren't grand gestures, they were stitches, daily, faithful, quiet. Over time, I felt the fabric hold. What made that first touch a lifeline was not merely skin. It was recognition, the sudden and radical knowing that my story was not finished at the precise page where I had set it down. When his fingertips found my wrist, they didn't claim me. They reminded me that my pulse was still a drum calling me home. I want to say I fell gracefully into that knowledge, but the truth is I stumbled. I tripped over old alarms, I revisited exits, almost taking them, yet each time something softer and stronger tugged me forward, the memory of how I felt in his presence, more honest, more awake, more fully held in my own body. Forbidden didn't mean wrong. In our case, it meant rare, requiring reverence and responsibility. We moved with care. We let the seasons test us. We refused to let the heat of now scorch the possibility of later. There is a moment every evening when the city lights find their confidence and the sky, undecided, holds both blue and gold. That is how loving him feels. A threshold where one beauty is leaving and another has already begun. I still keep my vows to myself, but they have changed shape. They are no longer barricades, they are bridges. I promised to tell the truth, even when the truth puts heat in my cheeks. I promised to honor the body that kept me alive when loneliness was the only witness, and to let it be met with hands that carry respect. I promised to turn back toward him after disagreements, not because conflict is small, but because connection is worth the awkward, necessary repair. And yes, I promised to feed desire with devotion, to choose us in the small hours when habit could easily take over. This is forever the way I can live it, not a distant vow carved in marble, but a daily practice, warm, imperfect, alive. When his forbidden touch became my lifeline, I fell into irresistible deep love forever. There are nights when I still wake to the echo of his heartbeat, not because it's near, because memory keeps rhythm better than clocks. Love doesn't end when distance arrives. It simply changes its posture, sits quieter, listens deeper. We didn't plan to be apart, yet life, with its stubborn schedule, demanded miles we never volunteered for. The first week, I tried pretending the ache was manageable. I spoke to friends, drowned myself in work, and whispered small, confident lies to the mirror. You're fine, you've been alone before, but the body doesn't lie. Every breath carried the ghost of his name. My hands remembered his weight, the way his fingertips pressed reassurance into my skin like Morse code. Short, long, short. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Distance became a teacher I hadn't asked for. It showed me the difference between need and presence, between dependence and devotion. I didn't crumble, I stretched. I learned to build altars out of small things, a text, a laugh sent across a screen, a song we both claimed. I discovered that longing can be holy when it's rooted in respect. He never demanded my constant availability. He simply waited in the background hum of my days, patient as sunrise, certain as the tide. And in that waiting, desire matured into something steadier, something that could survive silence. Forbidden, once a warning, had turned into a covenant. Handle this with care. We both did. We handled it like glass, fragile, transparent, precious. He called one evening just to listen to the rain on my side of the world. Don't speak, he said. I just want to hear what peace sounds like where you are. I laughed softly, half shy, half trembling, because nobody had ever called the sound of my loneliness peaceful before. The rain kept falling, unbothered by our sentiment, but in that moment it felt like a witness. He didn't tell me he missed me, he let the rain say it. That night, sleep came easily for the first time in days. The next morning, I woke with a calm I hadn't earned. It was his calm, shared across time zones, tucked inside the folds of trust we kept stitching together. The world could judge what we were, too intense, too fast, too impossible, but the world hadn't stood where we stood. It hadn't felt the quiet after confession, the oxygen that fills when fear finally exhales. I began writing letters I never sent. They were prayers in disguise, gratitude wrapped in confession. You have undone the ordinary. I wrote in one, you've made me notice light again. You've made me believe that touch isn't always a demand. It can also be an answer. Some days, the ache was too much. I'd reach for my phone, type his name, then stop. Love, I was learning, isn't only about reaching. It's about trusting the space between reaches. It's knowing the bond won't unravel just because silence visits. When he finally returned, the first look we shared wasn't cinematic. It was human. Tired eyes, trembling smiles, the relief that makes you forget words. He didn't rush to close the distance. He simply stood, waiting for my breath to find its rhythm again. When I stepped forward, his hand met mine halfway. The touch wasn't desperate. It was homecoming. That's the thing about real connection. It doesn't explode, it roots. Every gesture since that day carries the echo of that patience. The world around us resumed its noise, but inside we had built our own frequency. We no longer needed constant proof, no grand gestures for the crowd. What mattered was the quiet honesty between moments, how he noticed when my laughter was forced, how I knew when his silence wasn't peace but fatigue. Our love became less about drama and more about devotion. Some nights we'd lie side by side, speaking in half sentences, letting the pauses finish them. Intimacy isn't always touch. Sometimes it's being seen without being summoned. His hand would rest lightly over mine, and I'd feel my pulse settle into his rhythm again. That was enough. That was everything. Forbidden still lingered like a ghost word, reminding us that not everyone would understand, that some loves defy categories, stretch definitions, challenge comfort. But what is love if not a rebellion against emptiness? We didn't owe explanations to anyone. We owed only truth to ourselves, and that truth was this: the same touch that once felt dangerous had become sacred. The same desire that once scared me had become strength. The same person who once felt like risk had become refuge. This was no longer about falling. It was about staying when it's easier to run, choosing calm over chaos, depth over noise. I used to think forever was a promise. Now I know it's a practice. We wake up, we choose, we keep building. Every morning, every heartbeat, every touch that asks and answers at once. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. If you'd like me to continue to part 3, I'll carry this same emotional tone and narrative flow forward from this point, keeping the 6 keynotes alive as the story deepens into its next evolution. Of love. When his forbidden touch became my lifeline, I fell into irresistible deep love. Forever time has its own way of testing what the heart claims to know. Love that begins in fire must learn to live through rain. We had survived distance, doubt, whispers, and our own fears, but the real test came quietly, wrapped in ordinary days. No storms, no betrayal, just life asking if our hearts could stay tender when routine settled in. There were mornings when the silence felt heavier, not because something was wrong, but because we were growing into something steadier, and growth, I've learned, can feel like loss. The thrill of newness fades, but what remains is the pulse beneath it, the part that chooses even when it doesn't feel like choosing. That's where I found him again, in the small acts, the way he listened without trying to fix, the way he waited for me to untangle my own emotions before reaching to hold me. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was real, steady, grounding, deep. The kind of love that demands maturity, not attention. Sometimes I missed the rush of the beginning, that dizzying current of forbidden urgency. But then he'd look at me across the room, and everything inside me would quiet. That look was not fire. It was warmth, slow and constant, like sunlight finding its way through blinds after a long night. That's what love becomes when it learns patience. We built a rhythm that felt like breathing. There were arguments, sharp words, misunderstandings. The natural weather of two different hearts learning to move in harmony. He'd walk away when tempers flared, and I'd let him, knowing he'd return not with apologies alone, but with understanding. When I was silent, he didn't fill the air with questions. He waited until my eyes lifted, and then we began again. That's what our love had become, a cycle of breaking and mending, of falling apart and choosing to rebuild, stronger each time. He taught me that love isn't measured by the absence of storms, but by how two people hold each other when thunder comes. We started talking about the future in whispers, not because we were unsure, but because we wanted to protect its sacredness. Every plan we made was wrapped in realism, every dream anchored in effort. There was no fantasy left, only faith. We stopped needing to define what we were to the world. We already knew. He once said, "I don't want our story to be the kind that ends up told as tragedy. I want it to be the quiet kind that lasts, that stayed with me, because love at its deepest doesn't crave spectacle, it craves endurance." We began marking anniversaries not with gifts but with rituals, returning to the park where we first met, writing letters we'd exchange under the same tree, watching sunsets without speaking. Sometimes we'd just sit there in silence, and that silence felt louder than any declaration. I realized then that true intimacy isn't built in moments of passion, it's built in moments of peace, and yet passion still lived between us, redefined but not diminished. It had softened into something safer, warmer, wiser. When he touched my face, I didn't feel fireworks. I felt gravity, a reminder that this was home. His touch had once been forbidden, but now it was my anchor. Still, part of me feared losing him, the way one fears losing air. That fear wasn't insecurity, it was reverence. When you've been found after years of being unseen, you hold that light carefully, almost too carefully. I began writing again, poems, fragments, confessions disguised as metaphors. He never asked to read them, but one night I left a page on his desk. "You are not my rescue. You are the reminder that I was always meant to swim." He read it in silence, then folded the paper and slipped it into his wallet. No words, no dramatics, just that small gesture, like sealing a vow. That's how we loved, quietly, fiercely, consistently. The world around us changed. People came and went, jobs shifted, days blurred into years, but that connection, the pulse that began the moment his fingers brushed my wrist, never faded. It evolved. It became less about longing and more about belonging. There were still nights when I'd wake and reach for him, needing to confirm he was real, that we were still choosing this every day. And every time he'd turn toward me half-us, leap, whispering the same 3 words he said on the first night he held my hand, "I'm right here." Simple, unpolished, true. I used to think love stories ended when certainty began. Now I know the opposite is true. The story keeps living precisely because certainty is not a guarantee. It's a daily act of faith. What we built was not perfect, but it was honest. It carried scars, laughter, silence, and forgiveness all woven together into something that felt alive. And maybe that's what irresistible love really is, not a fire that consumes, but a flame that endures, soft yet unyielding, teaching the heart how to stay even when the world tells it to run. When his forbidden touch became my lifeline, I fell into irresistible deep love forever the years taught me. That love is not something you fall into once. It's something you keep stepping toward, even when your feet are tired. There came a time when everything around us began to shift. New responsibilities, longer days, more distance between conversations. The world outside was louder, demanding, impatient. But inside, in that quiet space we built between two hearts, something deeper kept breathing. It wasn't excitement anymore, it was reverence. I started to see love not as possession, but as presence. I didn't need to hold him to feel him. He existed in the rhythm of my thoughts, in the way I faced mornings without fear. That's what happens when love matures. It stops shouting and starts humming. There were nights when doubt tried to sneak back in. Could we keep this alive through all the changes? Could something once so forbidden truly belong in the daylight? But every time I looked into his eyes, I saw the same steady truth. We had already walked through worse. The rest was simply living, so we lived. We built a world out of small, sacred moments, coffee cups side by side, quiet laughter in traffic, the comfort of knowing that no matter how ordinary the day became, love still sat at the center, glowing like an ember that refused to fade. One evening, we returned to the place where it all began, the same streetlight, the same air heavy with memory. I reached for his hand, not because I needed reassurance, but because I wanted to thank the universe for that first forbidden spark. Do you ever regret it? I asked softly. He smiled, slow and sure. How can I regret what taught me how to love? That answer stayed with me. It wasn't dramatic, but it was everything. I understood then that love doesn't erase its scars. It learns to wear them with grace. Every risk, every tear, every trembling decision had been worth it because it led here, to this moment of quiet certainty. That was our miracle. No fireworks, no chaos, just peace. The kind of peace that feels earned, not borrowed. We had turned temptation into trust, fear into faith, and passion into permanence. His touch was no longer forbidden. It was home. Time moves differently when you're at peace. The urgency fades, replaced by gratitude. I started writing again, not letters this time, but reflections. Love is not what rescues you. I wrote, it's what reminds you that you were never lost. And maybe that's the truth I'd been chasing all along. When his fingers brushed mine that very first time, it wasn't about desire. It was about awakening, about being reminded that I was still alive, still capable of feeling, still capable of giving. Now, all these years later, I finally understood what that touch really meant. It wasn't the beginning of a forbidden story. It was the beginning of me finding myself through another soul. We didn't need forever to prove anything. We just needed today and the courage to keep choosing it again tomorrow. So this is where our story rests, not at an ending, but in continuation. In the quiet mornings when sunlight spills across the bed and we laugh at nothing, in the small arguments that teach patience, in the shared silence that speaks more than words ever could, love, real love, isn't about ownership or perfection. It's about understanding that someone else's heartbeat can teach you the rhythm of your own. It's about standing together in the storm and realizing you've already built shelter inside each other. That is what his touch gave me, not salvation, but a reminder that life, in all its mess and beauty, is worth feeling deeply. And I will keep feeling it again and again, every day, for as long as I breathe. Closing script. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it reminded you of a love you've lost or a love you're still waiting for, stay with me. These words are pieces of my heart, given so you can find a bit of yours in them too. Don't just like this, feel it. Share it if it made you remember, and subscribe if you believe that real love, the kind that transforms you quietly and completely, still exists. Because somewhere out there, someone's touch is waiting to become your lifeline too. When his forbidden touch became my lifeline, I fell into irresistible deep love forever. There are moments that arrive without warning, small and simple, yet they hold the weight of an entire lifetime. That's how it felt the morning I woke up beside him and realized we had finally become the peace we once chased. The sunlight was gentle, spilling over his face, tracing the same lines time had drawn since the day we met. He looked older now, but so did I, and somehow that made our love more beautiful. It had survived seasons, distance, fear, and silence, and still it breathed, quietly, steadily, faithfully. I reached out, my fingers barely brushing his cheek, and felt the same spark that had started it all. It wasn't wild anymore, it was grounded. That touch no longer burned, it warmed. I thought about the years behind us, all the choices, all the times we could have walked away but didn't. Love like ours doesn't stay because it's easy, it stays because it's chosen. Every day, every argument, every reconciliation, every whispered apology was another thread woven into this endless fabric we built together. He stirred slightly, eyes half open, and smiled the kind of smile that carries entire stories inside it. Still watching me, he teased softly, voice rough from sleep. I laughed quietly, always. That word carried everything I couldn't say. The loyalty, the gratitude, the unspoken promise that I'd never stop choosing him, even when the world around us shifted again. Because that's what love had taught me. It's not about holding tighter, it's about holding truer. It's the difference between needing and understanding, between desire and devotion. He reached for my hand, fingers interlocking in that familiar rhythm, and said, "Do you remember the first time?" I nodded, my throat tightening. How could I forget? You ruined my peace and gave me a better one. He laughed, and that sound filled the room like sunlight fills a garden, soft, endless, alive. We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. The silence between us had become sacred, a language only we could understand. Sometimes love outgrows words. It becomes an energy that moves quietly through the ordinary, making coffee together, sharing glances across rooms, knowing what the other feels without a single question. That's what real connection is, not constant communication, but constant understanding. I once feared the quiet, now it was my favorite sound. That morning, as we sat together, the world outside noisy and impatient, I realized how rare this kind of stillness was. Two people completely themselves with nothing to prove. It's the kind of love the world doesn't write about enough. Not the fireworks, but the steady flame that refuses to die out through every storm. I thought back to the first time I called his touch forbidden, and I almost smiled at my own innocence. It wasn't forbidden. It was fate wearing a disguise. It came to me when I least deserved it, when I was convinced love had outgrown me, and maybe that's why it mattered so much. Because real love doesn't arrive when everything is perfect. It arrives when you are broken enough to recognize its truth. His touch didn't save me. It reminded me that I was worth saving. Every moment since then had been proof of that truth. The world could say what it wanted. We owed nothing to its approval. What we had wasn't built for others to understand. It was built for us to live. And we did, fully, fiercely, quietly, beautifully. As the day moved on, I watched him leave for work, his silhouette framed by the doorway, sunlight chasing him like a promise. My heart whispered a silent prayer, one of gratitude, not fear. For the love that had once been impossible, now made real. For the man who taught me that deep love isn't about possession but presence. For the years that had shaped us both and still refused to dim what began with one accidental touch. I closed my eyes and smiled to myself. The forbidden had become my forever. And in that moment I knew some stories never end. They just learn how to keep loving in quieter ways. When his forbidden touch became my lifeline, I fell into irresistible deep love. Forever love, I've learned, is not the story we tell others. It's the silence that lives between two people who have truly seen each other. Years passed quietly and faithfully, yet every heartbeat still carried his name. Time changed the shape of our days, but not the rhythm of our bond. What was once forbidden became the most sacred truth of my life. I used to believe love had to be loud to be real, that it needed declarations and fireworks to prove its depth. But now, as I sit here watching him read by the window, his hair flecked with silver and his eyes still carrying the same warmth, I know the quietest loves are the strongest. They don't demand attention, they create peace. He looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled that same slow, knowing smile that once undid me completely. "You're staring again," he murmured, teasing gently. I smiled back, my heart swelling with the same ache that started everything years ago. "I still can't believe you're mine," I whispered. He closed his book, walked toward me, and took my face in his hands. "I never was yours," he said softly. "I was always ours." That single word, ours, felt like an entire universe settling into place. It was no longer about ownership or fear or rebellion. It was about belonging, a shared promise made not in words, but in the consistency of love, lived honestly every single day. There were days of laughter and others of silence, moments of exhaustion and flashes of joy that made everything worth it. We built our life in layers, not all perfect, but each one real. There were times we stumbled, times we questioned, times we doubted if we could keep choosing this path. But somehow we always found our way back, to the pulse, to the touch, to the truth that had once defied reason. I came to understand that love is not a single moment of falling. It is the art of continuing to fall, over and over, into the same soul, with deeper understanding each time. His touch was never about possession. It was a reminder, a map that led me back to myself whenever I began to forget who I was. The same touch that once frightened me had become my calm, my center, my truth. And even now, after all this time, when his fingers brush mine, the world still quiets. It's not fire anymore, it's home. People often ask what it feels like to find a love like this. I never know how to answer, because it's not something you find, it's something you grow. It's like tending to a flame that you know could die if you stop caring for it. So you keep feeding it with honesty, patience, and choice. Every day, we still choose, through the noise, through the aging, through the inevitable changes that life insists on bringing. We choose. That's what makes it irresistible, not the perfection, but the persistence. And maybe that's the truest kind of forever, not a promise carved in stone, but a living, breathing act of devotion renewed each dawn. Sometimes at night, I still think about that first touch, the one that started it all. I can still feel it if I close my eyes, the spark, the danger, the thrill, the warmth. But now it feels like gratitude, because that touch didn't just change my life, it became the heartbeat of it. I look at him now and realize we never broke the rules, we simply rewrote them. We proved that forbidden doesn't always mean wrong. It can mean rare, it can mean precious, it can mean worth protecting. What began as an accident became our purpose. What began in secrecy became our truth. And as I breathe beside him, older, calmer, still in awe, I understand what love truly means. It means staying when it's hard. It means seeing the same person in new ways. It means knowing that even after everything fades, what remains is real. His hand finds mine again, warm and certain, and I feel that same old current, steady as ever. He whispers, still my lifeline, and I smile, eyes wet with memory. Always, I reply, and you're still mine. Closing script. If you felt this story inside your soul, if it reminded you that real love isn't perfect but patient, then let it stay with you. Like, share, and subscribe to keep this heartbeat alive, so together we can keep telling stories that remind the world what true connection feels like. Because somewhere, even now, someone's forbidden touch is waiting to become a lifeline too. Before you go, take a breath, let your heart rest in the quiet between these words. If this story touched something inside you, remember, it wasn't just about love, it was about being brave enough to feel again. Every ending is just another heartbeat waiting to be heard. So until the next story finds you, hold on to this truth. Real love never truly says good. It just whispers. See you in the next chapter. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for believing with me. This is me signing off, but not ending. Love will always find its way back to you. Goodbye for now.